Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. Marie Lu is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of the Young Elites series, as well as the blockbuster best-selling Legends series. I was thrilled to have Marie on the show and loved every minute of our conversation. Marie shares how she finds inspiration for her characters and stories, as well as her methods for overcoming writer's block. She also shared childhood stories with me and what it was like emigrating from China. We engage in a candid conversation about stereotypes, racial injustice, and discrimination. Marie's newest book, Sky Hunter, is available on September 29th, and you can pre-order your copy today. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice. If you'd like to help keep this podcast going, you can support with a donation by being a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com. For comments or suggestions, email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Marie Lu. Thank you so much for joining me on Culture Chat today.
Thank you, Mimi. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, not as excited as I am because I've actually wanted to talk to you for such a long time, being a huge fan of your work and getting to meet you briefly at San Diego Comic-Con last year. And, it's a little hectic there, so we didn't really get a chance to connect further, but I've read pretty much all of your books. And of course, Legend series being one of my favorites of all time. The YA genre is kind of my guilty pleasure. It's my escape from reality, but lately, it feels like we are living in that dystopian future that you often and many other authors write about. Does what's happening in the world today kind of alter how you formulate your stories?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it's kind of impossible to separate your work from what's happening in the world. When I was writing Legend, it was back in 2009. And I remember I wrote it because it was like Obama was our new president. Everything was kind of hopeful and great. But at the same time, you could see like the thread starting to fray. That was the year that Gabby Giffords got shot. And there was some really ugly rhetoric coming out that Obama, just his presence in the presidency was drawing out of the racists in our country. And it was really unnerving to see. And I remember those thoughts kept me awake when I was writing that book. And so I look back and I kind of realize that every book that I write, I'm usually not aware at the moment of what's happening in the world that I'm putting into the book. But then after I finish that draft and after the book comes out, I can look back and see a snapshot of what the world was like at that time through my own lens, and how that affected me as a person. So I still think that's happening, except on like a much bigger scale. Since 2016, I feel like I'm more conscious of what I'm putting into my books that is from the world around me. And we were talking about escapism. You mentioned escapism, and that was how I started out reading YA too, as escapism. And now I've started to realize like escapism is kind of an interesting idea because you can't escape, the world around you, because the people who are writing these books are people, and we're living in this world that is changing and happening at the same time. So really you're getting a view, not so much of a world that's completely detached from ours, but I think the escapism part is how do these characters fix what's happening in their world, which is mirrored on our world. And for me, I think that escapism is what has changed for me. I've realized that sometimes I get so frustrated with my inability to control everything that's happening, that's going wrong in our world. But in my books, I am God and I can do anything. And I kind of love that feeling of I can make sure that the bad guy loses and the good guy wins. And I can make sure that certain things happen the way they do. And for me, I think that's the escapism, to know that there is a way out, Yeah.
It's you kind of answered the question, but definitely my next thing was, when I read your books and, being somebody who, especially in the show, I talk a lot about social justice and I consider myself to be an activist, and I read your books and I'm wondering, am I reading into this? Because you just, from Legend to Warcross to all of your different novels, you have different themes. There's always class and racism and different prejudices and equality that you're always kind of addressing, whether it's poverty and all these things. So I was wondering, am I reading into it because I'm very, much pro a lot of the things that you kind of tackle, or is it like you really consciously make that choice? And you kind of answered that.
I'm so glad to hear that and to know that you see those things. And I know we, all of us as readers kind of take our own things from the book, and I want readers to take their own, things from the book, and because we all have our different perspectives and also different things that we're seeing happening around the world. So but it means a lot to me to hear that, and I think it's so awesome that you're doing all that you do.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, it's interesting because I, like many of my peers and friends, we all love quote unquote YA novels. And it's hilarious because I'm definitely an adult, but I don't know about the young anymore. But I think to myself that technically that demographic is the demographic that really needs to be hearing about these themes that you write about in a way that draws empathy, because I feel that is something desperately lacking in the world we are in today, from leadership down. And if without that empathy, I think especially that generation has a hard time kind of grasping what is happening in the world around them. So definitely in what you're writing, I think that does get portrayed and come out. And, I want to kind of talk a little bit about your background and how you grew up, because I just think it's fascinating that literally you, in what I've read from you, it's like, oh, you just decided to become a novelist and suddenly there's Legend and it's like this huge hit, and not quote unquote an overnight success. But I mean, obviously you were meant to be a writer, but did you always want to be a writer?
Yeah, I didn't know that being a writer was a job that you could do until later. I knew I liked writing. I didn't know if it was going to become anything. I grew up in China and I came to the States with my parents when I was 5. And when I came over, I didn't know any English and my parents didn't really know any English. So my mom gave me this assignment to go to kindergarten every day. And I had to write down 5 new English words that I didn't know, and put them into sentences and memorize what they meant and look them up and all of that. So I technically began writing because I needed to learn the language. And so I would put these little paragraphs together for myself. And eventually when I, picked up enough words, I realized that I just kind of enjoyed the process of writing those paragraphs. And so, at the time my mom was working at this little restaurant nearby. And so I would go with her and they would I stayed in one of their broom closets, which was actually very nice. There was a little chair in there and a little TV. And so I was sitting there and wait for my mom, and I would just write little stories for myself. And that was a huge part of my childhood. I just remember, because I'm an only child, so I just kind of live in my head a lot. And I would write all these little stories and staple them together and write my name on them. But, I didn't know that. I also didn't know that books were written by people. I don't know where I thought books came from. They were just they just exist. They're just at the library. They fall
the computers.
You wave your hands and books. So it never occurred to me that people write books. And that didn't happen until I was 13 or 14. And I was reading an article in the paper, and it was about this girl named Amelia Atwater Rhodes who was 13 years old and had gotten her first book deal with Simon and Schuster. And I remember at the time I was like, oh my God, first of all, real people write books. The books that I'm reading are by real people. I don't know what I thought the names, on the books were for. And then I was like, she's 13. I'm 13. That means maybe I can write a book. And I got so excited. I think that was the moment when I knew that I would really like to be a writer.
Okay. Yeah. And do you have any of those childhood stories still for posterity? Or
I
they
have
all
them, but nobody will ever see them. They probably shouldn't put out.
Oh, well, I love the fact that you do share some of your inspirations, everything that you've been posting on social media, like during coronavirus, that you've literally been like writing down ideas. And
Yeah.
I think that it's just so beautiful to kind of get into the mind of the writer and the artist that is Marie Lu. And, you know, you did touch on, of course, your heritage and your upbringing and where you're from. And as I've been following you on social media, I was really intrigued by one of the posts you had about the area near Beijing where you grew up, and being a kung fu teacher who's Chinese American myself, rooted in tradition. I, like you, really felt connected to that post because I feel conflicted with honoring my Chinese heritage and culture, but then dealing with the conflicting feelings I have over the actions of the government, whether it's the Uyghurs or what's happening in Hong Kong and all of these things historically to now. I mean, literally, my father came here to escape communism and be in America. And I know that your family also left right after the Tiananmen Square situation. So, I would just love to kind of hear a little bit more about that, if you don't mind sharing, of course, with our listeners, what you started in that post.
Yeah, absolutely. And the post that you're mentioning, it was basically me. Like when I need to think, I like to sketch. So I just started doodling this picture based on this photo I saw of an area in China that reminded me of where I grew up. And I, like you know, think constantly about the motherland. Like, this is where I came from. This is my heritage. And I feel a certain connection to China, but at the same time, there's always this feeling of distance and of strangeness because, you know, I'm an American. I grew up here, but I have all these memories of what it was like to be in Beijing at the time, and it was 1989, and you know, bicycles were everywhere, and there was no skyline, and it's a very, very sharp memory in my mind. And you know, we left in 89 after Tiananmen Square. And I remember, you know, going out to the square with my aunt that spring. Like the protests in Tiananmen Square were happening for like months and months before the actual event. And we didn't live that far, so it wasn't a huge bike ride over there. And we kind of went because it was a little bit of a spectacle for the locals. You're like, let's go see what the students are up to this weekend. And I remember seeing like that white Statue of Liberty they erected in the square, and there were like 100,000 people there. So it was huge. And I didn't know what it was. I was 5 and I went there for the popsicles because it was so inside. And I just remember the day the shootings happened. We went in the morning. And I remember because my cousin, who's a year older than me, he was 6 at the time, had thrown a huge fuss because he wanted to wear his favorite red overalls to the square, and my aunt wouldn't let him because red was seen as too inflammatory of a color. She didn't want him to stand out, so he had to stay home because he refused to take them off. And so I went alone with my aunt to the square, and I remember seeing the tanks out in the square that day. They were kind of already in position, kind of at the entrances and exits to the square. And my aunt said to me, like, I don't think it's a good day to be out in the square. And so we went back and didn't really say too much about it afterwards. And I just remember the next day, like kindergarten was canceled. Like we didn't go to school the next day. And that was my memory of what had happened there. And ever since then, you know, now that I'm older and I'm in the States and I read about it from the outside, it's really surreal to think back on that. It's surreal to look at what's happening now, you know, in China, and to, like you said, wrestle with all of these feelings of, you know, this is the place that you were born in. This is where your family lives. There are thousands of years of heritage and history and culture that's so rich. And, you know, the Chinese people have been through so much, but at the same time, you know, it's really hard to stomach watching what's happening with the government there. And I think a lot of these thoughts that I have about China are mirrored in how I feel about America these days. And because China was my old home, but America is my home. And and it makes me feel very strongly about young people voting. and the fact that we have the ability to vote here, and that it's a right that we can't take for granted because it could easily disappear. It's kind of eroding as we speak, you know?
Yeah, no, it's voter suppression. There's so many problems.
Right, exactly. And like, if we don't move, if we don't take action now, if we lose this election again, I don't know when we're going to get another fair election. I think that this is kind of like a last stand, but the fact that we can make a stand is a statement to, you know, something that Americans have that maybe Chinese people don't. And you know, every time I feel like I can't do anything about what's happening in China, I think about the fact that we do have the ability to do something about things in America. So, yeah, it's a weird time. It's a weird time to be a Chinese American.
It is. Know? It is. Yeah. I mean, and this, we haven't even touched on, there's, you know, like you said, there's this love. I take students back every couple of years because I want to show them the culture. I want them to understand, you know, kind of where Chinese martial arts came from. And there's this wonderful connectivity. And I am at this point where I honestly don't know if I want to take students back and all the, plus that now I'm technically in media, right? Like, I'm not sure I'd be welcome back at this point with, you know, I've made a documentary. I'm very outspoken here. And that's a fear, like people don't really realize till, like you said, your vote's taken away, your freedoms are taken away, you feel suppression. Like you don't really understand what that's like till it's gone. And for you to kind of go in that reverse order where you were in a place that, you know, you didn't have those options. And then now you have this life and these choices to make that you could be a writer if you wanted to be a writer. I mean, honestly, in the 80s in China, I don't know if that would have been your path. You would not have had that opportunity, you know? So no, especially as a woman. And there's so many layers there, of course, but I'm with you in that. I love that, you know, your encouragement of not just the youth, but everyone to get out there and vote, because I definitely think, especially in the US, is something we take for granted. It's, you know, we have the lowest voter turnout. I mean, several countries, it's mandatory, right? There's a day off, there's a national holiday, everyone does it. They make it so, you know, important and it should be, because it's something that we technically fought for to build this country on. And now we just kind of take it for granted. Yeah. And fought for time and time again, you know, it's exactly. Yeah. So I'm with you on that. And it's just been, like you said, very polarizing, especially these last 4 years. This is honestly why I started this podcast. So I started this podcast in 2016, no accident, to just like build empathy and share stories. And there have been, even if it's one listener that says, wow, I heard a story about someone and I never understood that's something they would go through, whether they were an immigrant or someone who is a DACA student, all of these things. And I think it's important to realize like we're all people. And I think that's something that you really do well in your writing and in your characterization, is that we all fall madly in love with your characters.
Thank you.
Yes. And so kind of going into that a little bit, do you see yourself in some of the characters that you write, or, you know, how does that kind of come about when you start to build your characters?
Yeah, I think there's probably a little piece of me in all of my characters that I write, for better or worse. Like I remember when I was writing Adelina and the Young Elites, and that's a story about a girl who becomes a villain, and about her downfall. And she's a dark, you know, head. Oh yeah. And it's written in first person. And so I remember when I was writing that, I was like, ooh, this is an uncomfortable place to be in. You know, but I try to draw on moments in my life when I was frustrated, or, you know, I think we all have those moments where you feel like just everything is against you, or you've tried your best and people have turned their backs on you or something. And I wanted to play with that with her character. So I think I do that with pretty much all of my characters. And and sometimes, you know, I'm ready for it. Sometimes I'm not. Like by the end of the Young Elites trilogy, I felt like I was so tired of, you know, from being in Adelina's head, and I'm proud of her, but that was probably the hardest book that I've ever had to write, that series. And so, you know, it's hard to access all the different parts of yourself and put them into characters, but it's also kind of unconscious, you know. I think you can't help but put a little piece of yourself in all your characters. So, yeah, I could see a little bit of myself in everybody. Some of my characters are kind of like my wish fulfillment ones. So Amika Chen from Warcross is my wish fulfillment version. So I wish I could pull off her rainbow hair.
Right. I was going to say her look alone.
I wish I could ride a skateboard. I wish I could hack. I wish I had like sass, like, so I do that a lot too. Kind of put in traits that I'm working on or hope to get into certain characters. And those characters I think tend to be my favorites. Like they're obviously like, they're like idealized versions of who I would like to be.
Yeah. No, those are all amazing characters. And like you said, with the young elites, it was interesting because you literally like kind of took that on the reverse and went, from Darth Vader perspective, like you were literally in that head, but even still, you were able to kind of create that empathy for why she went down this dark path and why, like there's always a reason, and I think that's something that's often like, that's the hit or miss, I think, between like really amazing books and then books that you're just like, okay, this is a story, but the ones where you really feel empathy for quote unquote the bad person, and that you're really tapping into something, just like film, right? When we kind of root for the villain and you're like, wait, what's happening? It makes you kind of question yourself, where's this coming from? I was curious about that writing process. And I talked to a lot of authors. I'm very fortunate on the show to have had some amazing writers and creators. And I always ask them kind of, since I'm a martial artist, I like to kind of think about that process of how you kind of restore lost focus, or I guess writers call it writer's block, or do you kind of have a method, or do you never get what writer's block? Are you always just spewing out amazing content?
Also, I think it's amazing that you're a Kung Fu teacher and, you can find that, because I just find all of it so fascinating and cool. And I could probably use a few lessons myself on how to center myself, because I get writer's block all the time, especially now, especially since 2016. I feel like that really messes with people's creativity. Yeah. Like things are always going wrong in the world, but since 2016, things have been really just wackadoo in this country. And and I think it's mostly that your brain feels like it's been pulled in all directions, and so it's hard to draw on creativity at that point. And then it becomes a snowball effect, because I feel like creativity it happens because of other people's creativity. So when we have this like collective feeling of not being able to be creative because of what's happening in the world, I feel like it all one compounds the next, because I'm not finding anything that's inspiring me and other people aren't finding anything inspiring. So it's just like this word. I feel like everyone I know has this similar feeling of just like,
yeah. We just want to curl up in our bed and put the blanket over our head and be like, well, just wake me up when this is over.
Exactly. So it's been a particular challenge to dig into that well lately. I do find that it helps when I try to indulge in other forms of creativity, that it has to be something that's not anyone in any way related to my career. It can't have anything attached to it. It's just creativity for creativity's sake. And so if I'm like, lately I've started sewing. I learned how to like hem my pants for the first time. So all of my clothes are like perfectly tailored and have really ugly ass seams on them.
Nobody looks at the bottom anyway.
And I'm like, you know what? This is fine. I feel accomplished, and it's just very soothing to try to make a really even stitch. Yeah. So stuff like that.
And it's productive.
And it's kind of productive. Like I've had like 4 pairs of pants that I haven't worn in years because I never took them to the tailor, and now I can't take them to the tailor. So I'm like, I might as well learn how to hem my pants in my first pair.
For the day that we all wear pants again, and actually go
out. For the year when we can wear pants outside again, all of my pants will be ready.
I love that.
Stuff like that, and I, like you mentioned earlier, I do a bit of writing in the morning for myself, and I like to sketch, and those things kind of help me find that quiet space. But I won't lie, it's been hard. And there's no really easy answer for writer's block, except that someday you will get out of it. That has held true. Like at some point it does end and you find your creativity again, but while you're in it, it really sucks.
And I mean, a lot of the creators I've spoke to are like, well, basically deadlines pull you out of it because you kind of don't have a choice.
Will do it. I don't always like what I make when I'm under a hard deadline, but it does happen. So.
Well, I find and I'm by no means any artist, but I did do a documentary. And so I do find, though, that if you don't just say, this is it, I'm done with this chapter, I'm done with this part of the film, or then you can kind of stay there forever and kind of be in your head about it. And art is a lot like that. Like that's what you've created at that point in your life. And you have to kind of be okay with that. I mean, you have this amazing body of work, so I don't think you have anything to be concerned about looking back. It's just like, it's this just amazing body of work. But I think that, speaking to a lot of artists, there's a lot of that where you look back, you're like, oh, I would have changed this or whatnot, but then not really, because you kind of are okay with what you've created at that point. And like you said, it reflects so much of what's going on in the world around you.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't, I totally get it, because I haven't gone back and reread Legend in years. And I'm sure if I did, there are all kinds of things I would want to change about that book. So
don't change anything. It's perfect.
Yeah, it's hard to look, like you look back and you're like, ooh, God, that's what I wrote. But I think, at some point you got to put it down and just tell yourself, like, this is a snapshot of who I was at the time, and just kind of let it be.
Yeah. Well, you also get to do, the third and fourth, et cetera, installments. So we got Rebel, which kind of, was that little visit back to the Legend world. But then it's you as a writer. Was that last year already, or
that was last year? Oh gosh,
it feels longer in a way. I don't know, that the time space continuum is totally disrupted. And COVID's definitely done a number on us as well, because like I said, I met you with 70,000 people around us or whatever it was at Comic-Con. And this year it was virtual. And that must be for you
weird.
Kind of a weird thing, because you have book signings, you have conventions, you have things that you are normally expected to appear at. People want to see you and have your signature on their books. And that's kind of a little challenging now. I know that you have a few signings coming up for your new book, which we'll talk about in a bit, but how is that kind of COVID kind of affected your whole schedule?
Yeah, it's been weird for literally the entire world. But for me, I guess it's weird because writing is such a, it's like a career that is divided into two halves. And one is you are in the cave and you are alone and you write and you see nobody for like half the year. The other half of the year is the complete opposite, where you are talking to people from morning to night on the road. So you could not possibly merge two more different types of things to do. So on the one hand, it's weird because I feel like COVID life is not terribly different from when I'm on drafting deadline. Mm-hmm. I'm at home and I am working. And I'm very lucky to be able to do that. And then on the other flip side, there's the side where, like you mentioned, we met at Comic-Con and that's not happening. And there's like a million conventions that didn't happen. And yeah, I would have been on the road at least, a week out of every month. And I haven't been for the last 6 or 7 months. And it's weird. It's weird to be home for that long. So, and I worry, I think all industries are impacted in different ways. And with books, I worry about the bookstores, most of all, like indie bookstores, I think are hanging on. So, for everyone listening, please order from your indie bookstores, support them if you can. It's a weird time. It's a hard time. I know a lot of debuts are having a hard time because it's hard to get your name out there right now when you have no conventions and no conferences to give out anything. So I really feel for new authors this year. I think it's a terrible year to debut, and people are reading, but they're reading backlist, and I think it's really difficult to launch new things. So buy indie and buy some new authors' books.
Absolutely, yeah. And we'll link a bunch of stuff about that here as well on the site. But going back to your writing style, I wanted to ask is, you said, oh, I haven't read Legend in a while. How do you feel that your style has changed kind of from that first series to now? Going into a new one, of course, coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that I've grown, and I hope that the fact that when I look back on old writing, I'm like, ew, means that I've, become better, I hope. I think that I am more conscious now of what I'm putting into my books. So I'm a little bit more careful with my characters in a way that I think I wasn't so much before. Because when I wrote Legend, like nobody knew I was writing Legend. Like nobody knew who I was, and I had no expectations to meet. So I kind of just wrote it without. It was my most instinctive book, And now when I write, I am conscious of the fact that, oh, this is going to end up in the hands of young readers, or this is going to end up in the hands of these people, and so I think about things a lot more when I write, and I guess that's a good thing, I know it's good to kind of shut off everything and try to write in your cocoon, but at the same time, I think it makes for a more relatable and empathetic read if I'm able to, be aware of where the book is going to end up, once it's out. So that has changed a lot for me. And also just because we have a kid now, I have like a 1.5-year-old. So I think I'm much more conscious of the fact that young people are reading my books. So that plays a huge part as well, not that it's going to be a few years before he can read, but so yeah, but I do think about it. I'm like, God, one day he might pick up one of my books. He's probably going to think it's silly because it's mom, but I wonder what he will think of it. So that affects how I write now too.
Yeah. And, it makes you wonder, like, do you feel that because all of your books have been such a success, do you feel this like kind of growing pressure? Because like you said, you wrote Legend and it was just, you got to do what you wanted to do. There was no expectation, but there's so much more expectation because it's like, oh, the next Marie Lu book, how do you kind of handle that pressure? Or do you even feel the pressure?
Yeah, oh, for sure. I feel the pressure. I feel like, every writer faces different challenges. But for me, I'm always aware that like you're really only as good as your last book, so it doesn't matter how many books have come out or how they've done. You're only as good as the last book people have read from you and what they take away from that book. So it's always kind of stressful for me to be like, oh my God, like if they didn't like the last one, will they read the next one? And so I don't think that stress ever really goes away. And in every book that I write, I always have this moment like halfway through. I'm just like, this is the one. This is the one that is going to end my career. This is going to end me. And I guess the only way that has changed is that I now know that feeling. And I'm like, oh, okay, I've reached, page 150 of this book and that feeling has kicked in. I'm like, I remember this from the last time this feeling kicked in and I made it through that one. So I should make it through this one. And to kind of pull myself through like first drafts that way. I hate writing first drafts because of that though. It's not my favorite thing to do because of thinking of what people will think of this next story. Yeah.
So your process is pretty much like you said, you think about your characters and you do your first draft, and kind of take me through a little bit about that, because I've been, like I said, lucky to speak to a lot of authors and they all kind of have their own way of doing things, I've noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of amazing how many different like strategies are out there. I'm kind of in the middle. People usually fall into two general camps. Like there are people who outline their stories or like super planners, and they tend to spell out everything beforehand, and they have like long chapter outlines and are super organized. And the other camp who are pantsers, who write by the seat of their pants, and you just like start writing and you just go. And I really want to be a planner. So every time I start a book, I always do write an outline and I never follow it. It's really frustrating. I will get to like chapter 3 or 4 of my outline and just completely veer off the road into the weeds. So I'm kind of in the middle. My friend Amy Kaufman, who has a podcast out now on writing, and she's brilliant. calls it headlights writing. And that's basically you outline as far as the headlights shine on your car. And then you write that. And so I'll outline a few chapters and then I'll write those chapters. And then that's as far as I can see. So then I outline another few chapters and then I write that and then kind of slowly inch my way through that way. So I'm kind of in the middle. Like I outline a little bit. I know the big pivotal scenes that need to happen. So I try to steer myself in those directions. But, it's weird because every book is completely different from the book before it. So it's not like you're doing the same job over and over. It's like you are completely reinventing the job every single time. And that's, I think, why writing just feels harder and harder and harder as time goes on. Like if I was just rewriting Legend over and over, I think I would be great at it by now. I've got this story down.
And you do it in record time too. It's just
day 9, I'm done with this story. I wish, but every book is its own beast. So I've had different, strategies with every single one.
And typically, how long does it take you to do one of your novels?
This has varied too. Legend was probably the fastest book I've written. That was about 4 months or so. That first draft, and that's fast for me for sure. Like I've never written anything that fast since then. And then the longest was The Young Elites, which took a full year and a half to actually, no, the second book in The Young Elites took me a full year and a half to get down properly. So somewhere in there. Now, usually it takes me about on average a year, but it depends on the book. Yeah.
Right. And do you normally know, I know you said you kind of do the headlights thing and you're drafting. Do you normally know how it's going to end though?
I'm about to say yes, but then I've thought of a couple of books where I didn't. I just remember that I didn't know the ending for Champion until halfway through book 2. And I had a couple of different scenarios that I knew could be the ending, and I didn't know which one it was going to be. And it wasn't until the story had played out halfway that I was like, oh, okay, I think it's heading down this direction. Okay. And the same thing happened actually for the ending of The Young Elites in The Midnight Star. Like I didn't actually know which characters were going to live or which ones were going to die. Which by book 3 is like a big problem. Figuring this out. So yeah, I don't always know. I think I know, but then like everything else in my outlines, it tends to veer off somewhere too. I think the only series where I knew the ending was Warcross. Like I knew exactly what was going to happen at the end of Wildcard.
Okay. All right. And do you know, like, I'm always curious about this, like what the choice is for authors, whether it's like, oh, this is going to be a trilogy for sure, or this will be a trilogy, or I'll add one in later because the fans just love it, like Rebel. But do you kind of have an idea about that when you do your outlines, whether something's going to be a one-off or if it's going to be a trilogy? Or typically a lot of YA novels are trilogies. I mean, that's kind of a formula, but I've actually never asked that question. So
yeah, it's easier for me to figure that out than what the actual ending is. So I do kind of get a sense that, like when I started Legend, I was like, oh, this is 3 books. It just felt like it had 3 big beats in it. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, after Champion came out, I was like, actually, I think there's a little bit more here. So the number 4 came out for that one. But like I knew Warcross was going to be a duology from the instant that I wrote it. I knew that The Kingdom of Back was a standalone. Like that's my only standalone book. And right now, like I've got one coming out soon called Sky Hunter, and I know that one is a duology. And so I guess I have like a certain sense for how long they are book wise. I just don't know what's going to happen in them.
That's fascinating. I find that so fascinating. So I did want to ask about Kingdom of Back. Did you play piano growing up?
Yeah.
Very, very Chinese American of you. I hate to be all stereotypical and all, but I was like, I'm going to guess that she has a little bit of a Mozart background. But I learned a lot. I mean, I'm guessing that you pulled a lot of historical things, but also your own imagination. But I was like, I bet you should play piano.
Oh yeah, I was 100% that stereotypical Chinese. Played piano, violin horribly. Like after two years of that, even my parents stopped. They're like, we can't stand this anymore. I did all of the things. Yeah. I remember when I was a kid playing piano, I was like, I found Mozart fascinating, but I hated playing his music because um, his music is deceptively simple looking on the page. So it's easy to learn. It's like chess. Like it's easy to learn, but really hard to master. And I hated memorizing his music because it was so difficult and I could never play it quite right. And I was like, Mozart. But I just found myself reading about him a lot growing up just because I found him really fascinating. And then one day I was like, he has a sister? Like nobody mentioned this, you know? There's like not a lot out there about her. And so I kind of went down the hole on that one.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun and a real departure from kind of the normal dystopian theme. I mean, all of your books are very different, but you still kind of have that same feel. This was a lot more fantastical and like you said, a little historical. So that was a lot of fun. And I thought, I can't wait to ask her about her piano background. And being Chinese American myself, it's interesting because I get so frustrated with people for stereotyping, but yet I'm like literally a kung fu teacher. Like.
I feel you. It's it's okay for us to talk about it because
exactly.
I don't let other people mention it.
I know. My husband likes to his background is he's from Brooklyn, but he's Dominican, and he always likes to be kind of funny about it. He goes, "I can say that, right? Because I'm married to a Chinese person." I'm like, I don't know, But he does kung fu as well. He's practically. I mean, we do our best to try to speak Chinese, but it's rough. Yeah. It's a rough language. So, but I was curious about that whole growing up in California, literally moving here from China. Like, what was that environment like for you? Were you around a lot of other Asian Americans, or because I was in Orlando and it's very
was there anyone?
No, not a lot of minorities, not until much later. So now we have a huge Vietnamese population. So we've got a lot more color and a lot more diversity, but definitely in the early days of Orlando, Florida is not a lot of diversity. And of course, it's something I kind of highlight in my film about my father's life, where there was a lot of discrimination and it was just a different time. Well, not really a different time because obviously there's a whole different set of problems now. But what was that like for you?
Yeah, I totally get that feeling. It's weird because when my mom tells me stories about when I was small in China, I sound like a completely different person. Like my personality literally changed because I came to America. And apparently I was a brat as a kid. I was the only child in the entire family. So I was incredibly spoiled. I was so doted on in China. And then I came to America and I didn't speak the language and nobody so we started out in New Orleans. I didn't move to California until I went to college.
Okay.
I started in Baton Rouge and then moved to New Orleans. And so my first American experience was Mardi Gras. And I remember a couple of months in, my parents were like, let's go see what Americans do on, a typical week. And it was Mardi Gras.
Yeah, every week is Mardi Gras parades.
Yeah, I was like, this is bonkers. People just I don't know. It was really weird. And I think my personality changed. I became very quiet and very, insert. I was not brash and kind of bold like I was in China. I just became this very, very quiet and kind of submissive person because I didn't know what was around me. And I really liked living in New Orleans. It was a happy time. I remember being happy there. I thought it was beautiful there. I remember some weird moments, just like you. There's all kinds of discriminatory things that you remember. And one of the weirder ones was I just remember this old white lady leaning down to me with a very concerned look. She's like, are there any white kids at your school? And I didn't understand that question because I had no concept of what that meant. And I was just like, and I remember looking at myself, I was like, I guess I'm white. And that was how I answered her. And I was 5. I didn't know what I was talking about. But I love my classmate. I was one of only 4 kids in my class where I think there were 3 other Asian kids and that was it. And then the rest of my classmates were African American, and I had a great time there. They were great. I had great classes. And then the change that I remember that was really negative was that we moved from New Orleans to Houston. Mm. And, Houston is a very diverse city now, but the school that I went from a almost all Black school to an all white school. It was huge. I remember that was the only time in my life that I acted up in class. I got in trouble all the time because I was really unhappy there. I got teased a lot, got taunted a lot, got the chinky eyes comments all the time. And I hated it. I hated that school. I hated my teachers. I was really angry for those 2 years when I was in that school. And then my parents finally pulled me out of that school and moved me to a better one where in like a county where I think a full like 30% of the kids were people of color. And then I had a better time and kind of relaxed into it. But yeah, it was kind of up and down for a while. You know, I had great experiences in one city and then terrible experiences in another city. And yeah, I look back and I'm like, that those 2 years when we first moved to Houston were pretty miserable. And I think that probably cemented my first taste of what it was like to be, you know, the other in America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so interesting that you're kind of sharing this, and we're talking about the same country, yet just from place to place, from school to school, you can have such a vast, you know, variance in experience. And I'm sure it's because of your upbringing and who you are and who your family is, but you think a lot of your experiences kind of shapes that viewpoint that you see now, which I've seen online, that, you know, you are posting for Black Lives Matter and that you are very conscious about the racial injustices and things that are going on right now that a lot of people don't actually believe exist. And so do you feel like that's shaped by your experiences or just your upbringing, or is it a more current you know, thought process?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of everything. You know, there's a lot of things that I'm still learning about. I make mistakes all the time in the way that I think about American culture and racism in America. And I think it's a learning process for everybody. Mm-hmm. I do think it probably played a part. Like, I think about New Orleans a lot. I think like when Katrina happened, it was pretty devastating to watch first the hurricane and then the response to that hurricane. And you can't help but think that all of this is race-based. And of course it is, you know. Mm-hmm. This is the country that we live in. And, you know, America was kind of founded as a dystopia for a huge part of the population. So it's, I think about it a lot. And I think about all the things that I could do better, that I could think better. And as an Asian American, you know, we're kind of in that weird place, you know, we're the model minority. We're the ones that people like to use as like a weapon, you know.
Yes.
Majority likes to use this as a weapon against other minorities. And sometimes we buy into it because it's protection, you know, like you feel like you need to protect yourself. And so you want to be like the quiet one, the good one. Mm-hmm. And buy into that model minority myth, but it's incredibly damaging, not just for Black Americans and Brown Americans, but for us, like to be in that corner. And I think we can really see it now during the pandemic, and know that the model minority myth is not going to protect us. When the evil eye turns on you, like when you are seen, like mostly we're invisible, but when we're visible, it sucks, you know? So yep. I think that was served as a good reminder for all of us, that we need to remember the reason why we are allowed in this country is because Black Americans stood up for their rights and fought for everything that, you know, that we can have. So yeah, I think about that a lot. I think about my old classmates a lot.
Yeah.
I wonder if they were affected by Katrina. I wonder if they stayed in New Orleans, you know, so.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing that we are in this celebrated melting pot, and yet there's still so much dissonance and we have so much further to go. And it's been a very polarizing time and a bit of a crazy time. Like, I think it's just this perfect storm of after 2016, and then now we're in COVID, and then of course after the George Floyd murder, and then I'm like, is there anything else we're going to pile on top of all this madness? It's
just bring it all out now.
Yeah, I mean, right. And then of course there's been a lot of Asian American hate crimes. There's been things happening since the president decided to call it, you know, Kung flu and the China virus and things like that. And so, like you said, once the eye kind of turns on you, it's like, oh, now you're demonized. But I not that it's positive, but you're right. I think it's important for us, especially as Chinese and Asian Americans, to go, okay, you know what? We shouldn't just be we're the docile, we're the good, quote unquote, minorities. It's
Right.
important to kind of stand up and also empathize with everything that's been happening around us. And it has been a really interesting time for sure. In terms of your work, because it's very specific in the genre and the demographic that you write to. Is there anything that you wished maybe more people paid attention to in your writing, or do you feel like it's pretty much received as you've meant it to be, written or told, the story that you're telling?
Oh gosh, I am deeply, deeply grateful for everyone who's read it, read any of my books. I think that everyone needs something different, when they read a book. And I'm just glad that I hope it can offer a moment of comfort or a moment of happiness or humor or something for the reader. And so I think whatever readers want to take from the books is okay with me. I get a lot of really nice reader letters and a lot of angry reader letters. I'm just happy to hear from people who are reading the book. So I'm just very, very, very lucky to be able to tell stories for a living. Yeah.
So you mean during Legend when June and Day, like he couldn't remember her? Were people really pissed off about that?
Oh, I still get letters about it years from now, even though there's a book. I'm like, there's a book for it, guys. I can point you in a direction. I got a lot of angry letters. I take it as a compliment.
You have to actually, because on one hand, you can't obviously like get affected by every opinion that's out there, but the fact that you're affecting someone so much with these characters, it is a compliment, I think. So it has to be. I mean, I read your series, and it was funny because my younger cousin, who's of course a teenager, we're reading the same books. I'm like, I'm not embarrassed by that at all. But she's like, oh my God, I cried after that book. And she cried and cried and cried. It's like it is her favorite. And, I told her, she's one of my favorite little cousins. I would ask you, where the idea came from for that storyline. And it is one of your most beloved, trilogies, of course. So, but yeah, I mean, you said you just, and I know you've answered this in other interviews and things like that in the past, and we're going backwards in time, but it is a really beloved story.
Oh, thank you. Are you talking about Rebel or for Legend?
For Legend. Yeah.
For Legend. Yeah, thank you. That means a lot to me to hear. The main idea for it started off with Les Miserables. Like I was watching the old movie version of Les Miserables, the one with Liam Neeson in it, and I just remember sitting there thinking, like, this would make a really good teen story. Like, what if it was a teen detective versus a teen criminal? And that idea just that was the first spark. And I just kind of let it sit there for a second. And I remember a few weeks later, I was reading this article, and they had like a world map that simulated what the world would look like if all of our freshwater ice melted and our oceans rose by 100 meters. What would the world look like? And it was a really fascinating map to see how everything had changed. And in America, like Florida was gone.
Yes, we know we're done for. That's not a dystopian future. That's fact. So Florida's going.
Yeah, so Florida's gone. Everything from Florida up to the middle of Texas, all the way up to Virginia was completely gone. And in California, there was this huge lake that stretched from LA all the way up to San Francisco. And I remember thinking to myself, like, ooh, this is an interesting setting for that story idea that I had. Like, it just flood my city. And, so that's what I ended up doing. It was just easy to research, in LA, because I could just literally just drive around and see where things were. Mm-hmm. So that was the beginning of that story. And I had written an old manuscript a long time ago featuring Day as a character. And that book never worked out, but Day was the only good thing about that story. And so I realized that this was the right story for him. And it all just, pieces started coming together for that story. Yeah.
Awesome. And now I'm excited to hear about Sky Hunter, because of course, that's up and coming very soon. Actually, it's already a lot of readers I saw that you posted the other day, the hardback came in and it's very exciting. So tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited for it. It's coming out September 29th, so pretty soon. And it's, you had mentioned that you started the podcast in 2016, and that was no coincidence. And for me, the idea for this story came about in 2016 as well, with no coincidence. And it was when I was watching the Democratic National Convention, and I saw Mr. Khan speak about his son, Humayun Khan, who was a decorated young Muslim soldier for the U.S. And who had gotten killed in Iraq. And I just remember thinking after that speech over and over about the fact that so many of our young, people of color, people of different gender identities, are sent off to war to fight for this country that does not always have their back, and what that must feel like. And that just haunted me to think about. And then after the actual election happened, I was just angry. I was so angry, and I probably should have written something escapist, but there's nowhere to go. There was no way to escape this feeling that we all had. So I poured it into Sky Hunter. Sky Hunter is a story set 5,000 years in our future, so way far in the future, in a regressed society. So our civilization is gone. There's nothing but ruins left over, and there's a new society that's taken over. And in this world, there's a small country called Mara that is the only free nation left in the world. There's this huge federation that's taken over everything else except for this tiny country. And the story follows this girl named Talon, who is a member of an elite group of young warriors in Mara, who are basically, they are the only defense against Mara and this mighty regime that is going to take them over. And Talon is a refugee from one of the countries that had fallen to the Federation. So she's in Mara, and she's on the front lines. She's a very talented warrior, but people in Mara don't treat her the way that they should. And it's about her. It's about her found family and the other young warriors that fight alongside her. So very Band of Brothers. It vibe from that, and it's about this boy that she finds one day, who's a prisoner of war, who has fled from the Federation, and nobody really knows if he is if he's a good guy, or if he's a spy, or if he's a weapon that could be what they need to end this war. So it's all of that together. I had a lot of fun writing it. It's the longest book that I've ever written, and probably the hardest one, just because I was so mad when I wrote it.
At least you had an outlet.
Yeah, I know. I
just had to hit my punching bag.
Yeah. So that's where the book came from. And I had a lot of fun being in Talon's head. I'm still in her head. I'm working on book 2 right now. And that's the end of this duology. But, yeah, I'm excited. I hope people like it. I hope they like Talon, and I hope they like Red and all of the other crew that they're with.
I'm sure we're all going to love it. And so we can pre-order that as well, right? Tell us about all the different things that are coming up for you. I know that you don't have as many signings and events coming up, but you do have a bunch of things lined up to kind of launch the new book.
Yeah, thank you. We're starting, once the book launches, I actually get to do one quote, quote, physical event. And I put it in quotes because it's kind of half physical. It's at one of my local bookstores called Once Upon a Time in LA. It's a wonderful indie bookstore. And they came up with this clever way of doing a physical signing where basically I sit alone and on a desk in a desk in the bookstore, like a mysterious person with my mask on, and people can come up one by one to the doorway of the store and hand off their book to be signed. And the book will get passed to me. I will sign everything, kind of wave. And so we get to do that. I know it's weird and awkward, but I'm really excited to do it.
You're like, people.
We're humans. Hello, everyone.
That is exciting, but I think that's a great compromise because I know the fans are super psyched and bummed that you're not doing like the world tour that you normally do and everything. For now, we'll be positive and try to be hopeful that in the future we will all get together our Sky Hunter personally signed. And but definitely follow Marie Lu so that you can be in the know and enter all these things. I also noticed that throughout this COVID, you have been involved in a lot of fundraising and charities and things like that. I know those things are always going on. So, I mean, kudos to you for constantly, just being an activist and a positive voice.
Oh, well, thank you. And to you too. I think we're all kind of trying our best to counter this massive negative force in the world.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading Sky Hunter as my escape, but now I'm not sure it's going to be much of an escape.
I hope the ending of this duology will be escape.
I hope it will be. If you say escape, then I hope that it's what's it called? Foreshadowing. I hope it's fortune telling our real future. Then, right? Like you said earlier, I'm going to pick up that you basically are doing wishful things and sometimes in your writing. So let's hope that that's how this goes. And just out of curiosity, what other things do you enjoy to do in your downtime? You said earlier that you sketch, and I want people to look at your Instagram because your sketching looks like professional art. I'm going, are you serious? She can write and she can draw, seriously. And I know a lot of comic creators and I'm pretty close to a lot of them. I always find it fascinating that you have like multifaceted talents in that realm, but you see, you're quite an artist.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind. I don't think I'm good enough to be professional, but it's really fun. And I've drawn since I was little, and I do it a lot. I probably do it a lot when I'm procrastinating on my books too. When I'm hitting writer's block, you'll see me uploading art online. She's like, oh, she's delaying on her book. So I do that a lot. Yeah.
Do you often, because I see a lot of what you post are sometimes your characters and things. So maybe it's actually, gets you in the mood for it because you're actually putting that creative vibe out there. But I know you've got like you said, a 1-year-old or so that probably keeps you pretty busy.
Yeah, he's my new hobby.
Chasing.
He takes up many hours in the day, and it's all really fun and great. And I'm really lucky to have help. I have, my husband, who is a wonderful dad to him. And so we have a lot of fun chasing him around. So,
all right. And to finish our podcast off, because I know you probably have to get going on doing some other things here today, but what kind of books or movies, or what are kind of 3 things you'd recommend to other people, things that you like to kind of give shout outs to?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Let's see. Right now, actually, The Other Side of the Sky just came out yesterday by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. Highly recommend it. It's great escapism. It's like fantasy / sci-fi merged into one. It's really cool. It's about a princess who lives in a fantasy kingdom, and then in the sky, there's this floating city, which is a sci-fi world, an advanced world, and this prince falls from the sky, literally. And the two of them meet, and it's great, and I highly recommend it. I'm super excited for Sabaa Tahir's upcoming A Sky Beyond the Storm, because that finishes out her Ember in the Ashes series, which is one of my favorite YA fantasy series. It's so good, and I'm so scared for what she's going to do to all my favorite characters.
I know. I love that one too.
Yeah, right? So I'm excited for that one. Let's see. In shows right now, I'm not watching a ton of stuff, but I am watching Lovecraft Country, which I'm really enjoying. Yeah, and that's it's got that really it's weird, scary. It's like what is happening? It's Abrams and Peele, and it's all good stuff. That's what I'm watching there. I'm listening to this,
and very timely as well.
It's very timely and really good, and I'm enjoying that one a lot. I think that's all that's coming to my head right now. But lots of really good books out right now. Lots of stuff, and we're all at home, so
yes. Get to reading, and listeners, make sure if you aren't jumping into Sky Hunter right away, Marie has a ton of other amazing books that I will link here for you to read and get. And thank you so much for joining me today. This is so much fun. Hopefully you'll come back and chat with me again, and we'll be able to kind of delve more into culture and all sorts of other things. So thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Mimi. This was so fun, and you were so much fun to talk to. I love this. This was great.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.